Welcome everyone to the Rational Independent Wednesday, February 1st live stream. I titled this one The Long Retreat, and it's something I've been thinking about for a very long time. I'm hoping I have a little juice to dig into and discuss this. I try and save the live streams for topics that require a little more exploration. The morning videos tend to be a little more brief, a little on point, but as I'm driving home, I have the chance to expand and explore particular ideas. So, the long retreat. What do I mean by that? Uh, we were talking about bias the other day. I bias conservative. I was raised in a Christian religious household, and I generally agree with most of what I was raised with. My parents were dyed in the wool, Republican Party, rah rah, go red. They've recently been a little disenfranchised. I think pretty much everybody hates the Republican Party. I was briefly registered as a Republican when I was a young adult, but I disconnected from that. Because I objected to the way that they carried themselves and the principles that they prioritized, and that's something we're exploring as we go along here. So, I bring that up because it is an accepted tenet within conservative circles, and by extension, or related to Republican circles. It is an accepted tenet that, well, let me just put it this way. The mission statement of the conservative movement, one of their think tanks, is to stand athwart the tides of history yelling, stop. In other words, to stand in the way of an oncoming train and accomplish nothing. So in conservative groups, it's often the case that there will be an election that'll go badly, Republicans that'll lose, an area that will go from red to blue, red to purple, and the conversation will turn to, well, what are we going to do? Our elected representatives don't put policy out that lines up with our values. What are we going to do? And the response has been, you need to retreat. You need to go somewhere where you're surrounded by people who agree with you. That's horrible advice. And here's why. Demographically, if you do that, then what happens is let me take one step back. And again, this is with the live streams, this is what we do, where we kind of explore and unpack these ideas. And so sometimes it takes a couple layers. If you look demographically, meaning the characteristics of populations, generally speaking, dense urban centers tend to tilt towards leftist politics and a leftist ideology, and spread out rural areas tend towards more conservative and independent, right-leaning politics. This is not a surprise to anyone. I'm not breaking any new grounds. This has been known for a while. But what that means is, if you retreat, then what happens is all your your enemy knows that all they need to do to control something is to get enough power, enough influence in a certain area that they can start to change policy to tilt it towards their goals. And they know that if they do that enough and they push hard enough, their opponents will leave. And if their opponents leave, they get to solidify, they get to consolidate their power base. You go from 55% to 45% split area to now 80%, 75%. You go to an area where the other side doesn't even bother running serious candidates to oppose you. They don't bother spending any money to attack your ideas. You now have a stronghold. And particularly, this is problematic in America because you now have a stronghold centered on one of the richest parts of the tax base. you now control this huge section of the economy, and you get to influence it culturally. You get to shift the population and the demographics. You get to adjust the way, you start to get access to zoning. You can start to get access to redistricting efforts, and you get to really tweak and consolidate your power, giving you this crazy power base, where the other side looks at that and goes, oh, they now have an overwhelming advantage. Well, one of the it seems defeatist to me, but let's go one step further. So this has been the status quo for a few generations. You know, when Reagan, our parents' lifetime, when Reagan was governor of California, California was a red state. Even today, there are more Republicans in California than any other state in the country. Let that sink in for a second. A huge portion of people who lean conservative have no control over their lives because they are outvoted, because they are outnumbered. So, here's why this gets messy. Because, and I lived through this, so that's why I'm trying to unpack this a little bit. So, you have a situation where you have California, and now over the last few generations, it has become blue and then very blue. And maybe one day we'll do a deep dive into some of the reasons why that happened, and in particular, the role Silicon Valley played in that. And it's a kind of a Jordan Peterson related topic. He's a very smart man, but but a little outside the scope for today. So you have California that goes from red to purple to blue to dark blue. And now everyone looks at California as a foregone conclusion. Nobody cares about it in electoral politics. It's done. It's over with. Forget it. And that's a tragedy because it leaves a huge portion of the population unrepresented. But it's also a tragedy on a few more levels. And here's why. People who live in really wealthy, leftist-leaning polities are affected by the culture, whether you want to or not. I was making this point on a script I'm writing earlier today, so it'll come out here probably Friday. You're affected by culture. The human mind is tribal. It wants to connect. It wants to have the safety of people who think similarly. That's an inborn instinct. And one of the reasons for that is because that's a survival instinct. It's wired in us very deeply. If you stand out, you might get outcast. You might get exiled. You might be persecuted. You don't want to be in a minority. Now, related to that, and again, I'm going to try not to get too far down in the weeds here. Related to that tribal identity is an understanding that they've done. There's been studies done on this, and I apologize, I don't have the sourcing in front of me, but it's pretty solid. The human mind can really maintain about 150 relationships, and that's the limit. Some people a little less, some people a little more. And if you think about it, that's roughly the size of an ancient tribe with maybe some of the people in the surrounding areas you might trade with or engage with. In the modern day, that's the size of a large extended family, and then you add in some church or business contacts, maybe some school, alumni, friends, and that sort of thing. Everyone has their own personal network. And I bet you probably lived through this, where as you move through life and you disconnect from people, say after a move or after a retirement, and you start to change your social circle, the people that you used to connect with, the people that you used to keep up with, the people that used to come to mind, and you would ask yourself, I wonder how they're doing. I should reach out to them. Those people drop off your radar. And over time, other people replace them. because we have a max limit of what we can really engage with. Now, we live in a very interconnected society. We live in a world where you can have 1,000 Facebook friends. You may call them friends or whatever the website wants to call them, but they are not the equivalent type of relationship to a real life friend. You're not wired to do that. You can't. But sometimes it helps, you want to pretend, if that makes sense. You want to feel like you're connected to all these people because connection feels good. It's an inborn need. We need to be connected to the people around us. And again, I think that ties back to a survival instinct. So, how does this relate to the topic at hand? We live in a world where we are more influenced by the broader culture because we live in a highly connected world. But we lack the ability as individuals to influence that broader culture in the same way as we would in an ancient tribe. And so what ends up happening is that if you're clever enough, you can hijack that kind of built-in emotional map, and you can turn it into a method to get people to want to buy in to what you're showing them persuasively and help them feel like they're part of the in crowd, where they feel connected and loyal and belonging to this group, even though it's a group that they don't have any influence over, even though they are very passive in that group. And it's interesting because I think the protection against this kind of uh, emotional hacking historically is that if you have to connect with people face to face or write a letter or do something like that, where it's a very low tech, very time intensive or labor intensive way, you also tend to be doing it face to face in such a way that the person you're connecting with, it's a bi-directional connection. They can push back. If you start to say stuff that is out of bounds, if you start to say stuff that is obsessive or controlling or in some way socially negative, the people in the room are going to turn on you and kind of make a check on your personal power. And you realize, oh, maybe I went a bit too far. Maybe I shouldn't ask to do that. But that's not the society we live in now. We live in a world where there's limitless connectivity possible. That's frankly what I'm trying to do with this channel, is connect to people that I hope to find who are like-minded, that perhaps we might be able to make a difference. We'll get to that towards the end of this live stream. So if you can kind of hack into that desire to connect and belong, and you do so, you can create a group of people that will begin to behave ideologically aligned with each other. And the left is very good at this. They're very good, particularly at using the power of existing institutions to propagate their beliefs. They establish an in-group, they push out people who don't agree, and they begin to message to the people within their sphere. And they're masters at it. And I'm not bagging on them. It's a genuine compliment. They're very good at it. It's kind of creepy, but they're very good at it. And so you end up with these huge chunks of the population that believe in the cultural things that they've been messaged to, even if they logically might align differently politically. And what I mean by that is this. If you pull a generic Republican middle-aged man, 48 years old, from San Diego County or Orange County of California, and a similar 48-year-old middle-aged man from South Dakota, and you profiled not just who they might vote for, but you walk down the line of parenting style, wardrobe, car that you drive, things that you value, fashion, um, trends that you follow, technology that you use, if you go through and build a more complete profile, you're going to find that that California Republican has a bunch of pieces of their psyche that actually line up more towards the left. And this is why the long retreat is so deadly. Because what happens is leftists, blue area, whatever you want to call it in America ideology, they lock down an area, they begin to control it, they begin to exert sometimes oppressive control, particularly oppressive to those who might bend even more towards independence, more towards the libertarian piece. And those people who are those libertarians, they say, you know what? The only thing I want from government is for it to leave me alone. So I'm out. I'm going to leave and I'm going to go somewhere where people agree with me. And so a frustrated Californian pulls up stakes and moves to a red area. But they bring with them the blue culture. And now, because the left understands that politics is downstream of culture, now when the left decides to make a move into this next section, they've seeded the ground with people who align with them culturally. Now, when it comes to school board control, you're going to have someone who is now on that school board. They've come over from California. They're an active and engaged parent. Maybe they're a little more sympathetic towards using politically correct language to describe special education. Maybe they're a little more tilted towards changing the dress code a little bit to be more inclusive. Maybe to take a modern issue, they're a little more willing to accept transgender behavior from children attending the school. So now they start to push back on the red people around them who are more culturally conservative and say, no, we need to be empathetic. We need to be sympathetic. We need to support these people. And we need to do so by adopting leftist cultural ideals. And that red area begins in that moment to start to turn blue. And if you look at the demographic shifts over the last couple of generations, you can see this play out. We are getting more and more polarized as a country. We are getting more and more split. And unlike the Civil War, we don't have a north-south split. We don't have a clean geographical line or even a particular political issue that we split along. We split based on the cleanest split that you can see is county by county. What degree are you of urban or rural? And if you look at electoral maps, county by county, you will see almost without fail that conservatism thrives in all the rural areas and liberalism, leftism, whatever you want to call it, dominates those small geographic areas that have incredible economic and political power, those urban centers. Now, I said I lived through this. What do I mean by that? My wife and I recently moved from Maricopa County in Arizona. And some of you may know it's of recent fame after the Kerry Lake governor race, after the 2016 election with Donald Trump, and then 2020 with Joe Biden. And so I've lived through this transition. And the interesting thing is, when we moved there, which was 2012, I think, yeah, 2012, so 11 years ago, when we moved there, Arizona was deep red. We moved there because it was red. Now, we were moving from Utah. That's where we had gone to school. So we were going from red to red. You know, it is what it is. But we thought, great, we're gonna live with the Cowboys. We'll get along just fine with them. The interesting thing is, over the preceding 10, 11 years, Maricopa County, which is the urban center that pretty much covers Phoenix and its suburbs. Phoenix is geographically very spread out. I guess because in the desert it's easier to build out than up, but that's another story. So it's very spread out, fills up most of the county for Maricopa County, that one city. It's an urban center. And so what happens? It's such a wonderful place to live. It's so much cheaper than places like Chicago or California that people who are right leaning began migrating en masse to a place that they were more comfortable with, leaving the blue areas, coming to a red area. But when they did, they brought their culture with them. And so Maricopa started to change. And the interesting thing is, there are still some people that don't have enough decorum to subdue their political demonstration. Oftentimes, on the right, their political demonstration is very subdued, very dampened. We don't, we tend to be conservative. We don't tend to be bombastic and loud and in your face. We don't tend to rally. When we do, we usually clean up our trash afterwards. We don't tend to riot. We don't tend to make a big stink. But I will tell you, I lived there during the 2016 election season. I lived in Maricopa County. And Maricopa County swung blue and voted for Biden. It was one of a handful of areas that were key to that victory. And in Maricopa County, I saw truck parades. I saw ATVs decked out in Trump flags. I saw signs and banners and posters and billboards and you name it. Not exaggerating, literally, exclusively for Trump. I think I saw 2 small yard signs for Biden. And I worked in a job that had a lot of local travel to it. So I wasn't just in one neighborhood. I was all over town, all different walks of life, all different areas. The enthusiasm gap was incredible. And yet, somehow, Biden wins. Now, I'm not here alleging any kind of election malfeasance. That is completely a topic for another time. And it's also one of those nice, big, red, flashing, touch this and I'll nuke your channel topics from YouTube. But I think part of what shifted that is that even though people were vocally, politically aligned for Trump, there was a large cultural, quieter sympathy for the Democratic candidate, for President Biden. It's just my personal theory on one way that that could have worked itself out. So we are living in a time of the long retreat. We are living in the time where if we lose a fight once, we are counseled, give up that ground forever, go find another safe place. Well, there's another group of people that went through this process, and it's the Native Americans. Now, granted, genocide is a whole other thing. This is an imperfect analogy. I'm talking about just from a political level, not comparing oppressions. That's a topic for another day. That's a whole other thing. But the Native Americans retreated and retreated, and they gave up their land and they gave up their ground and they traded it for money or for freedom or for survival. Leave or die. It's a very compelling argument. So, what are they left with? They're left with a handful of reservations in some of the most desolate land I've ever seen. Again, I lived in Arizona. I've driven through the Four Corners area. It is like stepping 200 years back in the future. It is it's a throwback. It's a whole other experience. I lack the words to describe it. But it's certainly not thriving. prosperous, healthy, growing. It's none of those things. It's a travesty. So when we decided to leave Arizona, one of the places we considered moving to was South Dakota. And one of the appeals of moving to South Dakota is that it is deep red. And I told my wife, I said, you know what? I will happily live in miserable cold. I will happily put up with terrible weather, with bleak landscapes. It's got some beautiful stuff to it too. Don't yell at me, South Dakota. But I will happily put up with that if it means I can raise my children in peace. But the truth of it is, it's just one more retreat. And in a few generations, Arizona becomes deep blue as more and more people leave. And one more area falls to their control. And it's a tragedy. Maybe eventually they'll even come for South Dakota. You never know. We made a different choice. Part of that was fueled by some professional choices we made, and part of that, honestly, was fueled by a budding idea that I had, which is that we can't win this war, and it is a war, whether or not you think you're in a war. It's a war. We cannot win this war by retreating. We cannot win this war by ceding ground. Now, I'm using war as a metaphor for all the censors out there. What I'm saying is we have to, as conservatives, try and advance the culture that we love so dearly. We have to try and propagate it to our children. We have to try and share with our friends. We have to try and preserve freedom and liberty wherever we can. We have to learn how to create valuable content, valuable materials, valuable economic contributions so that we can be a force to be reckoned with when it comes to cultural messaging. Disney used to propagate quote unquote family values, conservative values. Disney does not anymore. It used to be, I've got little kids, that if a Disney movie came out, this happened in my lifetime as a parent, my oldest is 11, that when the latest Disney came out, I could blindly put my kids in front of that movie, not even have to watch it ahead of time, and know that what they were being exposed to was acceptable to my principles. That's over, and I don't see it changing course anytime soon. So, we've lost Disney. If you really look hard at it, we've lost most of corporate America. I'm probably on Friday, but I need to do a longer discussion on the idea of equity, inclusion, and diversity, and how it has infiltrated and captured most of the corporate powers that be within America. And by so doing, has, like a parasite inside a host, it has, it's going to start misdirecting that capital and the influence that capital has on the economy and the culture to things that propagate leftist values and that are destructive to those corporations. But ironically, if everybody's doing it, then it's kind of a suicide pact. But if everybody's doing it, as a consumer, how do you push back on that? It's not like I can say, Walmart, I don't like what you're doing. I don't like the decisions you're making. I'm going to use Amazon instead. Amazon's worse. Okay, well, Amazon, I don't like what you're doing and what messages you're pushing, so I'm going to use Target. Like, there's no refuge. They're all becoming more and more politically active, and they're all pushing more and more diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is deadly. to our culture and deadly to our country. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Well, not today, but I'll get to that in a future video. So to sum up, conservatives have a tendency to cede the ground that they lose in a political fight. They tend to seek out a place where government will leave them alone. And so they back away from areas that the leftists begin to control. And the leftist sphere, once they grab that, they don't let it go. And so that leftist sphere of influence grows and grows and grows. And in addition to political power, they use that political power to influence the local culture. And that local culture gets exported out to red conservative areas, which are then more susceptible to leftist infiltration politically and culturally. They've softened the ground ahead of time. And we can't stop this by fleeing from blue to red. And I've decided to put my money where my mouth is and my family, and to move my family from purple to deep blue, Denver, Colorado. And we're going to see what we can make of it. Anyway, I don't have any followers yet, so I know nobody's watching. So I'm not going to do a comment review period. However, I think I pretty well covered everything that I wanted to cover. Thank you very much for your time. Have a lovely day.